Rye Field Model has quickly become my favorite model manufacturer, at least if you're like me and you're interested in a more detailed, very accurate, and well-engineered kit, and this is no exception for sure. This video is going to be a post-build review of Rye Field Model 5062 Challenger 2. Now, as you can see, I've already done some modifications to it. All of the green stuff is not in the kit. That is because I added some parts from a Trumpeter kit, which models a later variant. As you can probably tell from the box art, the Rye Field kit's like a bare bones early Challenger 2. And what I've added from the Trumpeter kit brings it up to like a Kosovo era kind of vehicle. I mainly added the side skirts, the exhaust shrouds, the road wheels from the Trumpeter kit, and also, of course, the dozer blade. So as a post-build review, this is a video where we're going to go through a summary of the build, essentially a kit review where I've already built the thing, so I can tell you if parts didn't fit, if there's accuracy issues, and instruction errors, all that good stuff. So if you're interested in building this kit or have it in your stash, this should be helpful. So to begin, the hull in this Rye Field model kit was not issued as a hull tub, which I think is a bit strange. I kind of prefer the hull tub because I'm always worried that the parts aren't going to like line up properly, even though they usually always do, especially in a well-engineered kit like this Rye Field one. Also, when you're assembling the whole rear, there's an issue where one of the parts is misnumbered. The right part is shown, but the number A94 is incorrect. You actually want A95. That is the little vent thing at the back in this corner here. I'll show the instructions. There's a few issues here as well where like the toe points didn't fit into the locating slots. Either that was the completely wrong part that was called out for, or the slots are just the wrong size completely. Hard to tell, but I just had to cut off the slots and glue them onto the bare surface. I also added torch cut details to all the toe points on the kit, on the front and the rear. Not really sure if that's too accurate, to be honest, but it's a pretty standard detailing thing for modern kits that people add. I did the typical technique where I use either a hobby knife or like a razor saw. It's also a good option for just scraping the perpendicular lines. A great example of the level of detail that Rye Field Model can include in their kits is the rear light guards here, which are single piece plastic molded parts, and they're just absolutely beautiful. You could always get better if you use like brass rod or whatever yourself, but as for an injection molded part, I've never really seen anything more fine than what they have on these here, for example, and complex. It's like a slide molded part, as you can tell by the shape of it. When assembling the hull front, there was another part that was also misnumbered and mislabeled. Quite strange. I've never noticed that in a Rye Field model kit. This kit had a few misnumbered parts, but it wasn't too hard to figure it out because the kit only has like 3.5 sprues total, not including the tracks. So when you see like obviously the wrong part called out, you don't have very far to go to actually hunt down the right part. Moving on to the wheels, which is the next step in the instructions. No real issues there. Of course, as I mentioned before, I replaced the road wheels with the Trumpeter kit parts, which was actually much easier than I expected because the Rye Field kit comes with poly caps, which everyone loves for all the wheels, including the drive sprocket and idler wheel. And coincidentally, the poly caps actually fit into the Trumpeter wheels, which also have poly caps. Now, the poly caps are different sizes in terms of the axle they slide onto, but in terms of actually fitting inside the wheel, the Rye Field parts fit perfectly, so then they just popped on as if they were meant for the kit. That's, you couldn't hope for anything better, basically. Next up, you would move on to assembling the side skirts. As I mentioned before, I didn't use those parts. I used the Trumpeter assembly, which had more seam lines than the entire rest of the kit combined. I swear these old Trumpeter kits aren't... Building that side by side with this Rye Field kit shows you how far modeling has advanced in like 25 years. But yes, I put on these parts, and there was a few issues where the locating tabs for, not locating tabs, like the physical mounts in real life where the vehicle's side plates are bolted on, didn't quite line up between the two kits. So I had to do some surgery and cut off some of the molded on Rye Field model mounts and just move them a couple millimeters forward or back, so that when I glued on the side skirt, they actually aligned with the bolts detailing on the side skirts. Now moving on to the upper hull, this was molded as a tub, which I was happy to see. And the level of detail on this thing is, as with everything else in this kit, absolutely incredible. The louvres, bolts, hatches that are molded in place, Some handles are molded in. They look very nice. There's well details on the front. Everything is like top notch, and again, it's molded on, so very impressive. And then you do have to put on some parts, but most of the detailing is actually already molded on, which is very impressive. You do have to put on a ton of little handles and hinges on the engine deck, but those are actually molded very well with minimal sprue attachment points, and there's basically no seam lines on them at all, so pretty straightforward as well. The kit has a minimal amount of photo etch, but it's a good example of a modern kit where there's photo etch basically in every spot where it's kind of like required for level of detail. So for example, grates over the louvers on the engine deck, a couple of little stowage racks for like the cable reel in the back, and then things like up at the front, there's mounts for the headlights, for the smoke grenade launchers, and for the commander's independent thermal sight. A couple of the photo etch parts require minimal bending, but it's not very complicated at all. I simply did it with a pair of Tamiya PE folding pliers. And of course, there are no plastic options in the kit. If you don't want to use the photo etch parts, you're pretty much stuck with them. But again, the photo etch was pretty straightforward. Now moving on to the turret, much like the lower hull, it was molded as a bunch of flat panels. And as I said before, this can invite some fit issues, alignment issues. So be very precise and careful when you're sanding off the sprue gate attachment points, because they're on the mating surfaces. You want them to be as flat as possible so everything lines up nicely. And this was a case where you kind of want to, because you got like the side, the front, the rear panels, you kind of want to like glue the side and the rear together, let it dry, and then glue the front and the side together here, for example. And that way you can like clamp the rear, glue it nice and straight. And if it's not perfectly aligned, then you can clamp this and glue it, and then you're kind of like, you're locking one position, then you're fixing the next position once it's dried. Along the edge of the turret roof, there was a not continuation of the panel lines around the lip here. So I did use a razor saw and cut in straight lines to represent where those panel lines are going to basically roll over the edge of that plate. And then after the assembly of the turret panels and everything's done, you're really just gluing on a couple of details like the hatches, antennas, and so on, the smoke launchers, and then also the sights. Now for the sights, I temporarily glued them in place using some white glue, which can easily be popped off later. That allows me to remove them for masking the clear parts, or in some cases I've simply left the clear parts completely out. I'll paint it and then I'll pop those parts off because they're temporarily glued, put the clear part inside, and then put them back in place for final gluing after painting. There's also a very nicely detailed FN mag for the rooftop machine gun here, or whatever the British call it, an L something, I don't know. Now what we don't like to see in a modern kit are thread and rubber parts. That's very outdated. So the thread is for the tow cable. I didn't use it at all. For the rubber parts, which in this case you're only using the mantlet cover, luckily it was made of a very rigid rubber, so it was actually easy to cut off the attachment points and even do sanding. Typically, rubber parts are not able to be sanded, and it becomes a pain in the butt to cut off any seam lines and so on. This was much better than that. Another example of an outdated assembly in the kit would be the gun barrel, which is molded in two halves, which we don't like to see because there's seam lines to clean up, especially with all the details on a thermal sleeve like this. So instead, I ordered an aftermarket accessory from Micro World out of Poland, a small scale aftermarket manufacturer who mainly makes 72nd scale 3D printed and turned barrels and like smoke grenade launchers and other things like that. It's a beautiful print, also not very expensive, and it's done in an interesting way. I expected at first to be printed as one big piece, but I guess that would involve a lot of support structure and possibly warping. Instead, what they've done is mold each little segment of the barrel as an individual component, and then they're all basically aligned sequentially on the build plate. You cut them off. I just use Tamiya cutters, it's very easy. And then I use a file and then a sanding sponge to then polish off the little pimples from the support structure. And then you just slide them on sequentially onto the included aluminum turned rod. And that gives a sturdy, lightweight support structure for this beautifully printed barrel. And I had to do a little bit of surgery. I had to widen the hole in the front here in this piece essentially, and then also drill a hole here for the end of the rod to actually slide into place. And this is an example of a part I've left off, which I'll glue later, where I'll put the clear part inside, for example, like I talked about a minute ago. Let's wrap up with the tracks. So these are standard double pin workable tracks you can see in many modern vehicles and modern kits. And they're only 3 parts per link, which is about as basic as you can go for workable tracks. Very well done. The kit has 4 sprues of these, and each sprue has a little jig on it, so you can actually put all the jigs together to make a really long jig. And you just do a little bit of basic cleanup, and then you drop the lower half of the track pad into the jig. Then you drape a little like mini sprue of 7 pin assemblies into place. Then you put some glue in and then put the top halves on top, gluing only between the halves, not where the pins are. And then you basically just cut off the pins at the end from the mini sprue, and you have a workable track assembly. Yeah, I don't think they could really do much better than this. And no real like seam lines or anything, just a basic couple of sanding points for the sprue gates on each part of the track link. Went together very well. I did add some conduit wires for the headlights, which are sadly missing from the kit. They're quite a prominent detail on the real vehicle. So I simply used some 15 thou styrene rod. I've shown this many times. I just bend it with the tweezers here into like put the curves in it because it's flexible enough. And then I just glued it in place with a few spare photo etch parts to mimic the little mounts. And let's also talk about briefly the dozer blade here. This is from the Trumpeter kit. I think there's also some aftermarket option for it, but it might be out of production. Like I said with the side skirts, putting like some 25-year-old Trumpeter assemblies together next to the Rye Field kit shows you how far we've advanced in the past 25 years, because this thing was an absolute pig. You got seam lines everywhere, parts not fitting, warping, and then the detail was actually kind of crappy. So I did go through and add like hinge pin detail on every single articulation point, which does make it look much better. It is cool how it is workable in the end. Like you can actually fully play around with it, and it's got like pistons that actually go up and down. Like it's fully workable, so you can pose it if you want to. So now that I've made this conversion into essentially a KFOR configuration, I'm sure that there will be now a Rye Field Model announcement for this configuration, so you can thank me for my sacrifice. But otherwise, if you're building just the stock Challenger 2 kit from Rye Field Model, or you're looking to make this conversion, hopefully this video was helpful. I mean, the base Trumpeter kit's like $20, so you can sacrifice it for the accessories here, for example. I'm sure some of you noticed that I did actually leave off a whole bunch of detail on the hull rear, like the fuel tanks and so on. If you can guess what I'm modeling with this vehicle, you get 1,000 brownie points, because this is not a British Challenger 2, let's just say. Anyways, if you have any questions or comments, please post them on below. I always read through them all and answer as best as I can. If you like my work, you can support me on Patreon. That really helps me out. As always, I will see you guys next time. Until then, stay safe and happy modeling. See ya.